Oh, all right then. Welcome everyone to Planning Commission. I would like to currently excuse Commissioner McFadden and Commissioner Boatwright, who are not able to make it this evening. So I will go ahead and do the Pledge of Allegiance. I was just breathing. All right, sorry. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I just heard him like start to be like I was ready to go and he did not start. So anyway, all right. Sorry about that. It's very unprofessional of me. I apologize. All right. Next item up is public comment. So we'll open up for public comment, and then just a reminder to please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. Also to state your name and address, and please direct any comments to the entire commission, and then we will not be responding to any comments. So if anybody would like to make a comment, now is your time.
I'm going to say something. No.
Eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
Go for it. Dear Planning Commission, my name is Rob Osborne, in case you didn't know. 2317 View Drive, South Weber. My comment tonight is I'm a little frustrated with the way the Mr. Cook and the deal with the lofts is going on. I'm sure you guys are as well. And it's interesting that Mr. Cook comes in here with, oh, we're going to go from 64 to 50. And I'm sure Trevor was part of it, or excuse me, Taylor was part of it, but we went to hell and back trying to get that thing done. And to come back like this is kind of frustrating. And I read what he did in city council and saw that we don't have a zone for that. And I would encourage the planning commission to go back to the city council and say, look, city council, it may have been a flowery speech, but we're the planning commission and we don't have a zone for that. And so we need to discuss that with Mr. Cook and get him into the proper zone, either do an R7 or do a patio, residential patio. That's it. That's the only zone. We don't have a zone that's kind of make up something here and something there, because then you're going to get really big trouble with other people who want to try to do the same thing. I'd say just keep it consistent. So that's the frustration. It's make him fit into an R7. That's or excuse me, R7 or a patio home. I think he's trying to lean towards a patio home, which is fine. But just if you do a patio home, he's going to have a lot less units than 50 to fit on that property. Thank you so much. Have a great day. I'll stick around for a minute more. Thanks. Well,
Thanks, Rob.
Gee, this is my speech. I know. It was directed towards you, Wow. I'll call him.
No, he didn't.
All right. I think that'll do it for public comment. Yeah, can I get a motion to close public comment? We didn't open it.
Yeah, that motion to that one.
You're
so close. You opened it really well.
I did. I'm almost there. By the time I get it, you guys are gonna fire me, so. All right, approval. Yeah, just gotta make it 2-1. Approval of consent agenda. I'd like to open it up for my fellow commissioners if they have any concerns over the agenda.
I didn't see any issues with it.
I don't have any either.
And I also do not have any issues, so I'll look for a motion there.
Make a motion that we approve the consent agenda for the planning commission on September 15th, 2022.
And I will second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, next up, item number 4, public hearing and action on ordinance 202215 South Weaver City Code, Title 10-5C R7 Zone Amendments. If we can, Trevor, if you wanted to say a few words to kick it off, I guess.
Sure. So included in the packet is the draft ordinance change with the definition, land use matrix, building lot requirements, location of structures sections, and the appendices section that was added to the R7 and to in larger total Title 10 for the definitions and some other items there. So I took the notes from the last planning commission, tried to incorporate the items in there. One item that I was struggling to figure out a good solution on, and so if the planning commission wants to suggest a solution, I leave that in your capable hands, is requiring a minimum lot area for other dwelling types within the zone. That was a little bit difficult on what the minimum that we wanted to include on that was. That 1,000 square feet, was that 2,000 square feet. The ramifications of that change and vary based on the dwelling type, right? And so I thought about listing every dwelling type, doing a townhome type, apartment, condo, those are things, but they all have some variability in it. And so I did not put a minimum square footage there. However, I did put a minimum lot width, which I feel like is the larger issue that we're trying to deal with, is what is the look and feel that we want to kind of drive towards these developments. Having a narrower lot that's 15, 18 feet wide creates a unit that's very narrow and straight up. And so I feel like after looking at standard widths for a garage, 24 feet felt comfortable to, allow for a 2-car garage type of use if we would like that, or greater if they want to go greater than that. But that's kind of the minimum that we would go on the lot width, which then in turn would help inform the other square footage, as we go out. And so that's kind of some background on that. Other than that, I did incorporate the other items, the setbacks for other dwelling types, the 25 feet front setback to accommodate larger vehicles and things like that. So that's really all I have to update there. And I'll answer the questions after the public hearing. So
Thank you, Trevor. Can I get a motion to open the public hearing?
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing and action on ordinance 2022-15 South Weaver City Code Title 10-5C R7 Zone Amendment.
I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. The motion carries, and we are open for public hearing. Is there any comments?
he didn't have a handout. Let the record know.
Hey, I'm doing this extemporaneously.
Trevor, I have the exact same concerns that you have about describing what that other dwelling type is, because as it is right now, somebody could put anything in there, and that really needs to be narrowed and defined, because some of the larger corporations that we're dealing with will find a way to get around anything you try to do on that. So my recommendation is to try to narrow the band on it and have very well defined dwelling types. Because somebody could go in there and say, oh, well, I want to put a tiny home here. Well, that doesn't fit the type of development we're talking about. So anyway, thank you. Did I give you an address?
No, you're fine.
They have it memorized.
Pretty sure we could pull that from somewhere.
Would you like me to stand up and send you? Okay. No, you want to do it? You run drive something. Yep.
It's 2527 to the right. But we don't need addresses. We decided.
Oh, we're
we're
Paul
just
started
picking
South
one
Weaver
city
City.
or-
Good.
Hmm.
When did that change?
Yeah. So you don't sign in on the sign-in sheet.
Yeah, I did that.
It just says which city you're.
Okay, all right, that's
We
fair.
do need to change our agenda.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So appreciate that. Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah.
All right, we're just running real loose today, sorry. All right, looks like there's no more comments. Can we make a motion to close public comment?
I'll make a motion to close public comment.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. All right, open it up to my fellow commissioners to start comments on this adjustment.
Shall I go? It's short and sweet. It's very short and sweet. I just want to make sure, and I wrote this down so I can remember it. But just does the R7 zone changes that are being proposed have the teeth that we need to protect and preserve the city and keep that small town community feel that our citizens have expressed desiring? Given that it's our largest zone, our largest density zone, I want to make sure we've got the teeth. Because obviously the whole reason we are going through this discussion now and reopened it for public comment and another public hearing is there was a big miss that was noticed with the zero lot lines when the South Weaver Gateway project came to Planning Commission. And there was nothing we could do about it. And I think that was a big hit in the gut, realizing that. So, and I want to make sure, obviously, that I think the intent of some of these changes is to help that development get a sellable product, not just a for sale or a rentable product, but I also want to make sure that for those few remaining zones that are R7, that again, the intent is being protected with our highest zone. And again, teeth, I want teeth in it, so.
I think we have a lot of things that will help us maintain the look and feel that we want. Setbacks is one. The setback is a large piece of that, how buildings are oriented towards each other and towards the street.
Can you pull that up? Because I know you put in the
Yeah.
packet.
Do you want to pull up the ordinance? So those setbacks will really help massing on the site. It's kind of a delicate balance with massing do you want them all nestled super close together? Do you want lots of space in between? Some of the thought process, I mean, when we're thinking of the look and feel of South Weaver, open space is a really big component of that, allowing for larger open spaces so that there's a free area feel, not an urban feel, right? And so being able to mass the buildings a little bit closer together helps create the open space that's necessary on the other side of the property because our density also is restrictive on that, then it provides that balance there. So I feel like there's teeth there. There's the ability to have some flexible uses it's not in this because they didn't change, but you can see we added the definition of dwelling townhouse. We also have dwelling multifamily, dwelling single family, dwelling two family, dwelling twin home already defined in our code. We have a definition for tiny homes, which are found within the recreational vehicle section because they're typically on wheels, right? On a trailer. And so we have those definitions and where those are allowed and where they're not allowed. They're permitted or conditional uses. And so I feel like that those teeth that we already had in the code, along with, allowing for some variability in that will allow us to have a little bit better projects that we can work with on that. So that's all I have. I'm gonna cough really bad.
Really sick of you.
Mhm.
Can I just make a comment?
Go for
based
it.
upon what you just said? So your premise was, does it maintain the character a small town,
Well,
South Weaver.
again, highest density zone.
Get it.
We're only going to 7, and there was a lot of discussion going back many, many years at this point. And I understand, like, we can't determine exterior look, any of that, but with R7, like, there was some conversation at, the planning commission meeting, or not planning commission, city council, when, the developer Joseph Cook for the loft came in and was asking about, if I do this in exchange for a density bump, that it kind of raised a little bit of a red flag, not full mast, but just kind of like, is that where people are going to start then trying to come in and get something that goes above what we've set as our highest density?
Well, I don't think this code prevents that. It
Mhm.
just lays out per this density, this is what is allowed.
And that's where,
And then it
that's
has
all
to
we've
go-
got.
Yeah.
like-
Yeah, right. And then it's a developer agreement after that,
Mhm.
if the council wants to move forward with something that's outside of that framework.
I'm actually glad you said development agreement. Is that something that needs to be, that R7 needs to have a development agreement? Because I know there's been a lot of discussion about it. And I remember hearing it, we can't require it, and then some saying, yes, oh, but we'll just do a development agreement. Do we need to have something in the code that says,
So we can't require a development agreement for every development. Does that make sense? So writing in the code that to use this zone requires a development agreement, we wouldn't be able to do that because that's not allowed. We need to have the zone be able to stay as is, but we have the ability to allow for the conversation development agreement if we so choose.
Okay.
Typically that process is very similar to, hey, there's some things on this property that we need to maximize, or we'd like to maximize our bottom line, right? So we want to include more units. And so we'll give you things in exchange.
mhm,
We do have the ability to dictate style on multifamily units. A townhome is technically a single family unit. And so there's some limitations there. However, the state code does allow us, if we provide zoning incentives, meaning a density incentive, in an overlay zone, then we can dictate styles of uses on that, regardless of the use.
but
for
we
single
don't
family.
have any overlay zones.
But we currently don't have any overlay zones. When we were talking about this in code committee, we talked about the possibility of creating overlay zones that can overlay on top of R7. The thing to think about is, where is the sweet spot in incentivizing a density, and how much that density needs to be in order to get the developer to agree to do a custom project on the site, right? A lot of developers like to take a design we did somewhere else and apply it to somewhere else so they have less architecture and engineering costs. So to require development standards and design standards, that then increases their output. And so they're looking at, where does that threshold? And I don't have a magic crystal ball right now to tell you where that threshold is. We had talked about the possibility of creating an R5 zone with an R7 zone overlay.
And I remember that as part of the
Yeah.
discussion, I
Mhm.
think in the last packet.
Yeah, and so I think if that's the direction we want to look and explore, I think that's a really important thing to take our time in and figure out, if we want to do overlay zones, where would we want to allow those overlay zones, and be okay incentivizing those. That's kind of the first question, right? Do we even want to do this? And if we do want to do it, then there's the process of creating them. But if it's not something we want to explore, then perhaps it's not necessarily something we want to take the time to create a code for. Because if it's never used and we just have code on our books, it's never going to be used.
So I think getting back to the original comments you made, that
Yeah.
are we maintaining the character of South Weaver City? Character has been a very difficult thing to define and provide a standard into which we're not arbitrary and capricious, right? But based upon what you've laid out here, and the comments that we received upon different development types in the city, is there an opportunity to create another barrack style townhome development?
With
Maximize that to the
no
north side.
articulation.
Yes,
Is that what you're doing? Absolutely, yeah.
so.
Freedom Landing. Not
are
fair.
we-
I think Freedom Landing, not fair. I don't like it when it's cold.
Yeah, There's very, rectangular building, not a lot of architectural interest. But from what I'm gathering from how we've gotten this written right now, is you could build to the R7 density without really influencing the feel of the development
You would need an overlay to articulate the architecture.
or design standard or anything besides a single family or a townhome. So I mean, I'm reading between the lines at this point, but I'm feeling like there's no real appetite to consider a form-based approach to the R7 zone. Like, I keep saying that seems to be a really good approach, but we're not putting any kind of time or calories or effort into it.
I think it's a really good form-based codes. For those who aren't familiar with form-based codes, they're a code that dictates the form rather than the use. That it highly emphasizes the form of the unit rather than the use of the unit. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's no holds barred and you can use it for whatever. We would still have limited uses and things like that.
The designation would be for residential purposes.
Yeah, the designation would be residential purposes, but in essence, we don't necessarily care if it's a single family or two family, but as long as it fits the overall general theme, right? That's the idea of a form-based code. You can narrow that scope or expand the scope however you want. You can say, okay, for single family homes in this overlay zone will allow for additional density, but you have to make them look like cute little bungalows you find in California.
Swiss chalet.
Yeah, Swiss chalets or whatever,
Urban
whatever it might be.
Yeah.
I think
we have
one barrier is, and this we can, as the planning commission, you can recommend to the city council that you work on is figuring out what those design standards are so that we have the ability to create the overlay zones and influence those decisions over time. But that it is a large amount of work. I mean, I was involved in a form-based code that took 1.5 years to implement. So, and it's an addendum to the general plan. And so,
Well, I guess to that, I think form-based code has its place and its purpose. Maybe something if it had been enacted when South Weaver was developing as a city, probably could have had some real sway over the past 7 years. But now, I mean, I guess I just kind of wonder, is the effort involved in creating that form-based code
I think
gonna have a payoff?
the value and the effort's always there,
Oh, there.
whether you start it now or 7 years ago. I mean, we don't have that many R7 zones.
Nope.
So if
We
we're
were
gonna do it,
looking
we gotta
at
do
the
it.
map and there's maybe 2 left in the city,
Unless somebody comes and requests a rezone.
and then the request.
So I just feel like if, as written, to answer your initial question, does it prohibit, not prohibit, is not the right word. Does it create a development pattern that we already know and we've heard from other citizens that just is not desirable? And I think it still does. So
More importantly, to what I was saying, it's the teeth. And does it have something to where if a developer shows up and says, well, I want to do this, our code very specifically, da, 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 da. And if anywhere along the line, it says, nope, then it doesn't even come to us for discussion, for input, for any of that consideration, because it either meets the code as it's been written, or it doesn't.
and those teeth that you're looking for is the ability to offer them for individual sale and not for the.
Well, because I think that was the
That was-
big mistake
that was-
that was noted. I think everything else, the density, I mean, there was a lot of discussion that went on about that. Should it be R5? Should it be R7? Should it be R13? Kind of splitting down the 20, the 24, 25 that it was before. 24, like, do we go in half?
Yeah.
You were part of that too.
I
So-
don't certainly, yeah.
I think at one point we all got a little punch drunk and was like, RU5, that's what we're calling it, residential unit 5, that's it. So I just want to make sure it's, again, doing what it was intended to do the first time around.
I think it would make a lot of sense to maybe present that idea to city council and get their feedback, because if they're not gonna be on board with it, then there's no point in spending a lot of time trying to figure it out. Right?
Blair, can you give us an indication in terms of the council? Are they kind of like,
it's only
Wanting
one
it
of
fixed.
5. Let's
Yeah.
remember that.
he's not gonna do it, he's like, no, I'm not talking about it right now. Wait till it comes to city
So
council.
I totally understand what you're saying, because I think that would prevent something that maybe we wouldn't want to see.
I'm just trying to align to the values that we identified in the general plan. And based upon what we've written, it doesn't feel like we're putting ourselves in a position where we're gonna give ourselves the development that I don't know, maintains that small town rural feel that's written there. Because we already know that there's development that's been allowed to happen that is not in character. And I don't see it being prevented.
And from a city council's perspective, I don't think they're opposed to form-based. But it's not necessarily the code that's restricting us, it's the new legislation. that's restricting us From allowing that, because we can't put those
So I think that's,
requirements on the development.
I think.
The
that's what I
design
wanted to-
standards, is that what they're kind of tying our hands on?
And
So if I'm understanding what Trevor said though, is we can, as long as it's not a townhome. But then we can even restrict a townhome.
you can't restrict an individual home either.
Any single family units you can't restrict unless it's within an overlay zone and it has the density
Any
consensus.
single family home, the way it reads in
Yeah.
the new legislation, so
And
that.
no
and it
family
hence that's
home,
your
which
across
home?
the city.
Which would be townhomes.
So, well,
Yeah,
so
that's
an alternative to form-based that can be maybe a little complicated and time-consuming is an overlay zone where we reduce the zone to R5 and then incentivize builders. Well, if you want more than that, then we get to help dictate what it looks like.
That's,
To what end is the other thing, like.
I think that accomplishes what you brought up. Well, if we only go with an R7 zone, then it can be bunker style, right? There's nothing that technically prevents that.
Right.
Right? But if you put an overlay zone on your R7 and reduce it to R5 and then say, well, if you want to add more units in there as an incentive to get more money out of the project, you know, the catch is, well, now we get to be a participant in what it looks like.
And you would write in those overlay zones your design standards, right? So
So we still need a design.
you would still need to create a design standard because anything else is subjective at that point, right? If you don't have any design standards, then it's similar to doing a conditional use permit. If you don't have anything to really judge it, it's all arbitrary and capricious, right? And so it's like, well, they're asking me to put like 80 gables on one house, and it's like, well, this doesn't make any sense. And it's like, okay, well, but if we have that in the design standards and the fleshed out design standards is something that takes a very long time. That's why it wasn't, that's why we, at this point with the R7 update, we didn't move forward with that because that involves some public feedback on what are those design standards, what are those important features for the community that create the community that we want. And then it's formulating, okay, how do we make those design standards into the code? And then where do we want to allow for these overlay zones if we want them? And so it's a lengthy process. I think that process is long term. It's definitely something we can work on if we have the vision of where we want to utilize those.
It pales in comparison to how long you're gonna be living with that development.
It absolutely. So it is your prerogative to not recommend this to the city council, right? We can rewrite it. You can say, no, we don't recommend this. We recommend that we do a longer process, and the city council can consider that when they review the ordinance. It's definitely your prerogative to put that recommendation
I have a
forward.
quick question. And it has to do with the overlay, since we're obviously talking about it, and I read the notes from the previous thing where it was talking about the different discussion items. You know, allowing the single family housing complexes like cottage courts, the mansion style apartments or condos that look like a house. You know, but they actually function as 4 to 7 units within the home. What was the consensus with the code committee? Was it something that they were like, we like this, we don't like this, we see benefits, we see it being more, you know?
The code committee responded really favorably to the idea of overlay zones with specific ideas in mind of what those units would be. We, for the sake of the R7, we moved the conversation forward based on just updating this to make sure that we have the 0 lot lines. But it is something that, you know, I even had a conversation with a couple of them the other night on they still have the desire to explore the overlay zones, to include those and to look at the feasibility of doing that. I think, and I said this already, so I won't beat a dead horse, but I think the biggest thing is when we look at overlay zones, as a city, we need to decide, are we going to allow these anywhere?
Because we currently do not
we-
have any overlay zones.
Right, we currently don't have any overlay zones. We currently don't have a projection for any future R7 zones. And so if we want to take the time to do that and create these overlay zones, I think that's a fantastic thing to look at. But if we have no desire to ever use them anywhere, then we're kind of stuck with, well, okay, do we do a lot of work for something that we're never going to use? Right. So that's the question. And I think that's something we can explore as a planning commission, make a recommendation to the city council. However we want to do that. So to peel back the onion on the code, it's always so fun when we get to see more and more of the impact.
My only recommendation, and I don't know if this makes that big of a deal, but when it was on the appendix, or appendix A, the dwelling where it showed the diagram, I was just curious why we've got, obviously it shows the multiple buildings. There's 15 feet one direction, but side to side, there was only the 12 feet.
Mhm.
Why wouldn't we want to keep that 15 feet just for space? Because I get, okay, we want more open space, but you also need room to navigate through buildings and around buildings. And I've been to development where you can't even fit between two buildings.
Mhm.
So I don't know,
That's definitely less than 12 feet.
or is it 12 feet? Yes, right?
I know, what I'm saying is that if you can't fit between the buildings, it's definitely less than 12 feet.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. So is 12 feet sufficient? Does it allow for sidewalk? Because again, back with the city council, when they were like, yeah, no interior sidewalks, I just sat there and was shaking my head like, no.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't think
Um,
that's the feel of what we're
I-
wanting for.
I think it
down
does.
the
It depends on the size of the sidewalk.
So
If
we
it's,
have a minimum of 5 feet.
our minimum is 6 feet if it's part of the right of way, right? But if
Okay.
somebody wants to do interior sidewalks outside of the right of way, then like a walking
Like a
path, they
walking
could
path?
do a 4-foot sidewalk,
Okay.
and be fine.
That's plenty of space there.
And so,
I just
12
figured
feet,
if 12 feet to 15 feet.
where we did 12 feet, that's like the standard traveling width of a vehicle, right? In,
Okay.
in a road. And so if you have to get a maintenance truck back there, you have the 12 feet
Okay.
to get a maintenance truck. The 15 feet, and this is completely up to you if you want to make those equidistant. The 15 feet was, we had moved the extra 5 feet from the front to allow for a larger driveway.
Mhm.
And we had just, so it's
It's
still
just a
the
matter of
total,
placement.
so it was just, we did 15 feet in the rear, but we can make 15 on the side as well. That's totally up to you guys if you want to recommend that.
Well, I guess my only question on that point is, if 12 feet is the minimum, like how tight of a squeeze is that for a utility truck to get here?
The standard traveling width on a road,
So it wouldn't be too bad.
wouldn't be too bad.
Fire truck could get to it.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. Then I'm okay with 12 feet.
Okay.
Any other concerns, Julie? I'm sorry, Commissioner Wilson.
Commissioner Davis.
Commissioner Walton, any?
Formal.
anything else you'd like to add?
I think I've communicated my overall just concern, like. In school, we always have the exercise, take this code and build the ugliest thing that you could ever build using this code in the zone. And, I mean, I haven't done that on this. I don't know if we've tried, done a test on it, but I still feel like based upon what we've written here so far, you could build something pretty horrendous. And that we wouldn't have the ability to say no, right?
Okay, so what's missing in what we're basically recommending to city council? So do we want to recommend this to city council, or do we say it still needs more work? We need to establish what the design standards are, or have the conversation about overlays. Because it sounds like the only way we're gonna get design standards is with an overlay.
I think the recommendation of this code will be, forgive me if I'm coming off rude or if this is not right, but it's gonna be more of the same. Right? We've defined different setbacks and everything else,
Mhm.
but we're still gonna be in a position where we're gonna have development that is less attractive based upon what we've heard from the citizenry.
Mhm.
So my recommendation would be that we look at a design standard, whether we apply an overlay or we look at form-based code, entirely up to the rest of the commission on what we provide there. But what I'm ultimately wanting, and I've wanted this for quite some time, is predictability in our development. Like when a developer comes in, we have a design standard that has been well understood by the city. And the citizens know what kind of design they're gonna, or what kind of buildings they're gonna get out of the process. And that we minimize our impact on the developer with all of our different wants and wishes. And again, there's predictability for all parties involved. And I don't know how we get there with how we've been writing code. I mean, it's so difficult to just rely on setbacks and all these different things that try to address design standards, but can't. So unless there's another rock that we can look under that writes something into the code that gets us to where I think we need to be or where we want to be, I think we gotta look at design standards and a form-based code.
Well, I can appreciate your opinion. I just don't think that it would take, I think it would take way too long to go down that path.
I just think it's a lot of work.
You would almost freeze all development in these zones until it's all done. So not that that's necessarily the reason why, well, not freeze it, but like people can still develop how it's written, right?
So
I don't see the benefit of at least fixing what we know is wrong and then going through the work and then adding something to it like the overlays, or if we think form-based is a more appropriate long-term solution. But I wouldn't agree with not recommending this. I think this is good and it fixes what we already know was a major problem, and maybe doesn't get it to where we want it to be 100%, but I think it fixes a lot of the issues that we were aware of, and then we can tackle maybe from a goals perspective, like, okay, now let's. In fact, I was talking to Trevor about something like this. Is let's lay out things that we know that we want to address in the code. That, to your point, we've been just kind of limping along and just kind of maybe putting band-aids on the bigger problem. Let's rip all the band-aids off and then.
I totally agree.
Fix it.
We're already doing it. With code committee, that's how we started this. Right, when we started code committee, how many years? We were gonna rip the band-aids off and get into it and fix it. And once you rip one band-aid off, like you said, peeling back of the onion.
There's more band-aids underneath.
Yep. Yep. And here's,
It's like a
Sometimes they look
2-year-old got
hairier
a
and
hold of the
hairier.
Band-Aid packet and just started going to town.
so I get it. Where you're coming from. I guess my overall concern is what's pushing us to a decision. Is there a need to have a decision within the next, I'm just gonna throw out a number, 6 months.
I think for me, pushing decision is we already have an agreement to build something
It's with South Weaver Gateway.
in the
Right.
gateway.
I mean, let's just be honest and open about it.
But
It's South Weaver
Haven't
Gateway.
we addressed that issue with not offering those units for individual sale? Is what we've already recommended for approval?
So the development agreement, that was they approved, the city council approved the gateway with an administrative development agreement that basically we made the promise that we would look at our R7 code and see if there were changes that we could make to allow them to come back and replat their site to allow for a for sale unit. That's what the administrative development agreement stated, among other things, but that's the most pertinent one for this conversation tonight. And so that's the kind of the driver behind this conversation and this look at the R7 code now. It doesn't have a time frame in that. It just says that we will look at that, and so we can take our time. We can look at it a little bit longer. I think to Taylor's point, any static zoning code, especially now with the design standards being taken off the table on single family units, you can put a square unit on the thing with no articulation, no, attractive siding, and
But you can do that right now.
you could do that right now with any one of our codes.
So it doesn't.
And so,
It doesn't change that, and it doesn't harm anything.
correct, it just allows for flexibility usage for to create the townhome plats that we currently don't have the ability to in the R7 code. I definitely agree that having development standards and design standards is really effective when the city has a goal of what their look and feel needs to be and accomplish, and taking the time to identify those areas that we want to affect. For instance, if we look at that, we can look at what does redevelopment look like along South Weaver Drive, and how do we influence the look and feel of South Weaver Drive over the redevelopment, because that's the next stages as we kind of move into post build out in the next 15 to 20 years. Is there's going to be redevelopment opportunities with some agricultural land and some older homes that are dilapidated. That's an area that we can look at for form-based code and overlay. It's just taking the time and energy and resources to do that. There are grants we can get to allow us to look at those and get started on some of those things with the Wasatch Front Regional Council. And so we can look into those as well, but it is a lengthy process. Typically, the ones I was involved in, it was a multi-step process for a form-based code, and it took about 4.5 years to implement the total form-based code process. And so it's a lengthy process because it's tacked on to the end of your general plan, because you create small area plans, you designate where the small area plans that you want to influence, you create many concepts for those areas, then you have to create the zoning for a form-based code, rezone all those areas for the form-based code, and create the zoning ordinances for the form-based code. So there's a lot of steps to that process, and I think it's definitely worthwhile to look at it. It just takes time and resources.
So from my standpoint, there is a reference in our city code right now to the development standard or standard design element. It was one of the things that I put on the board first when we walked into code committee that I wanted to have looked at. We still have not looked at it, right? There's always something else that's going to be hot and pressing. So I mean, we either make this a priority or we don't. And then if we don't make it a priority, it feels like we're going to get the same level of product that we've been experiencing from developers.
I don't disagree with you, but if it's been on the board all that time, then it obviously isn't a priority.
And that's what I'm really asking. Like, if we're okay with the way that the development has happened, like the form and function of it, then let's approve this. But I think there's better options out there. And again, I'm going to go back to the comment that I made earlier. Like the development that we have now is going to be with us for the next 70 years or more, right? Is it worth the time up front now to get a design standard that works for the next 70 or 80 years for those things being built today? Or are we okay living with, subpar development or whatever could come in the form of a development proposal in the future?
I agree with you. I just don't agree that this is the time to put our foot down and say no more until we.
Well, it probably should have been done right before, because they've already got the approval at this point. They can go and they can
And I'm
build
not even talking
without
about
even
it.
doing, no, I know. But I'm just saying in terms of any other areas right now within South Weaver, yes, we've only got 2 that are R7. Could somebody come in and say, hey, I want to rezone to an R7, and what standards would we apply to that? I think that's the hard part is.
I think the first step, honestly, Commissioner Bowman, is convincing the rest of the code committee to be as passionate about it as you are. And if we can start there, then that, I think, sets the stage. But until you get that commitment, then us blocking things or denying things isn't going to prove beneficial, I don't think.
And I think if we took it back to the code committee, we've had some changes, but I think they've always been looking for us and our recommendations as the land use authority on maybe even direction that the code committee should take, right? We're the land use authority, not the code committee. So if it's something that we want to direct towards the code committee to evaluate and look at, then that's I think our prerogative, not theirs.
I think to help with the conversation, I think this type of recommendation is definitely something that you can send forward with this ordinance, right? that we recommend approval with this ordinance. However, we'd also recommend that the council direct staff and other time
Mhm.
to investigate design standards, overlay zones and things like that to
there's an
facilitate better
openness
design,
And a
right?
willingness
And
for it.
and make that part of the motion, make that part of the recommendation as to the city council so that they can, because something like form-based code or overlay zones is going to take a lot of time, resources. And so the council really should direct where those resources are going to come
So,
from.
and I think I want to better understand too, when you were saying multiple years to be able to get to a point where we're implementing this, I think that's going to scare off a lot of folks. I'd like to better understand that for myself, and probably maybe the council and the rest of the commission would like to as well. Like, why did it take so long? Are there ways that we can streamline the process that you experience because we're a smaller city, or we're not really looking at that many parcels that we would like to provide this standard to? Like, maybe there's efficiencies there that we get this done faster. I don't know.
We could. So if you think of in the instance of form-based code that I've been a part of, the very first thing that needed to happen was to do an identification of small areas that the city wants to look at redevelopment or future development potential. So identifying those areas is the first thing. So a lot of things goes into that. Public outreach on where city centers would be want to be. And that's something that's also something that we're discussing and thinking about already, but identifying that it's going to be the biggest thing. So you look at real estate potential, you look at redevelopment potential, you look at, cost of areas. And so you get a lot of little hands in that pot to get the data and get the information. Then that data informs small area plans, which if we want to think of those as mini general plans for smaller areas, creating multiple small area plans or even one small area plan does take a lot of public outreach, time to craft and identify the areas and things that we need to do. So identification of areas 6 months to a year, creation of small area plans, again, can be 6 months to a year. And then the creation of a form-based code is something that, typically a city can't do that on their own because they don't have the internal staff time to do that. So they hire out a consulting firm that will handle the public outreach for a form-based code, will handle the data and the analytics, will put forth examples, and a lot of workshopping will go forward to that. That process I've seen take a year to a year and a half. And then it's the implementation where you rezone every area that needs to be affected by the form-based code. So you do a mass rezone, a mass notice of all of the areas that need to be rezoned within those small areas to affect the change within the small area plans. That rezone process takes quite a bit because you have to get a lot of legal descriptions analyzed and put in, and the ordinance is drawn up, the notice is given out to the public input coming back on rezoning their property without their consent. There's just a lot of, the public kind of helps lengthen that process out. And we've seen that in our own processes with our general plan. And so that's just where I've seen that time. And so the more we can involve the public, the better we can communicate. Obviously, that's going to go a long way in shortening kind of the pinch points on the public process and involving the public. But it's just a public process, so it just takes time.
And I think I've seen, maybe you guys have too, that the public is engaged on this, meaning that whatever we get these bigger development proposals, they're emailing us concepts that they would like to see,
Mhm.
right? So I think I might be speaking out of turn, but there might be, I believe there's an appetite for having citizen involvement on a design standard.
I think the hard part with that is for every email that we received, everybody had a different viewpoint
But that's
and a
fine.
different, I want this, I want this.
I think that really comes back down to how you facilitate those public hearings and public meetings on what a design and feel looks like.
I had a quick question. Where was it that the other dwelling, I know that part of the public comment tonight was about the dwelling types.
Mhm.
Needing to make sure that it was defined as clearly as possible. I think that's something that obviously with the recommendation, there needs to be that noted that the other dwelling types does. And then one other random quick question. Has Jamie reviewed this
Yes,
and what were his thoughts and
he gave me a thumbs up, which makes me nervous every time, but he said it sounds great.
what? Is it because he gave a thumbs up on the first
Because
version?
it's because I wrote it and I was like, I wrote this, Jamie, and he's like, no, it sounds great.
Okay.
Well, thank you.
So we've got at least a thumbs up from legal.
Yes, we have a thumbs up from Jamie. He feels that all of it is within our ability and rights to do. And it's within our purview to review. As far as the dwelling types, we have those in the definitions and in the land use matrix already on where they're permitted.
Okay.
And so, I mean, we can be a little more explicit in the description in that if you want to be more explicit, but
I
because we
just
have
wasn't sure exactly where we wanted to make sure that we had that other dwelling type defined, because obviously this is a residential. I guess, is that meaning other dwelling type like sheds, things like that?
No,
guess
so
I'm just confused with that.
there's a definition in our code for what a dwelling is.
Yeah,
And then there's sub definitions for each type of dwelling that's allowed. So
townhouse, condo,
yeah,
like-
townhome, condo, multifamily, single family, twin home,
And obviously, we're not
two-family.
looking at the land use matrix here to see all of those laid out.
Right.
Did we talk about adding in the garden court and the
We haven't
mansion
added in
style,
the
things like that?
garden quarter mansion style. Right now, those are still, those are allowed uses. It's a single family
Okay.
use or a multifamily use.
Okay.
Or a condo use. And so those are allowed uses are not specifically called out. I think it'd be beneficial to call those out when and if we create those overlay zones. We'd have an R7 mansion style overlay zone, for instance, then we can dictate the look and feel of those through the.
What
design
exactly you
standards.
want those?
Mhm. But we can also define those. I have a definition and again, if you want to, if you want to continue the item till next meeting, that's perfectly fine as well. So,
I'm fine moving it along, but.
I'm just waiting. Anything else?
Okay.
Michelle?
Just one final question, that would be the portion of the code that allows the Gateway project to do individual plats for sale.
Mhm.
That's done.
yeah, so the biggest hindrance was the creation, the zero lot line description, a definition for dwelling townhome was another one, and then the setbacks, looking at orienting those setbacks towards the private right of way and the other main buildings on the lot. And so what's written here should correlate fairly well with their development.
So if I'm understanding that correctly, we need to move this forward to allow that.
If we move it forward, they would have the ability to come in and try to replat that. However, the agreement that we signed was that we would look at it, right? And that's,
We didn't have a time frame
we didn't have a
established that it would
time
be done
frame.
within a
We didn't
time
have
frame.
it didn't say you need to create a code for us to be able to do this. It was, we'll look at the code. So there's no need for us to do it unless we want to allow them the opportunity to come in and replat. So that's,
So I guess where I am at on this is to say that I think we got pretty clear direction, or at least I felt like the directive was clear to us to try to figure out how we allow individual planning for sale of those, that development, just so that that feature is there and ready if they want to. And to that effect, we've done a lot of work to rewrite this R7 code. So on that front, I'm okay to have it move forward. I'm overly concerned, I guess, at this point, that it doesn't address what Commissioner Losey identified earlier in our conversation, is doesn't give us the
Look and
teeth to
feel.
maintain that look and feel that our general plan and our citizens have identified. So
But I think it's fair at that point to say that there needs to be the conversation and kind of, where we say at the council level, do we want to direct staff to discuss these overlays? Because I think at this point, our code's never going to allow us on a residential, single family for sale product to be able to dictate design standards. The only way we're going to get it is with an overlay. So, or a form-based code. So that needs to then kind of become the conversation at the council level to say, is this something that we want to start investing staff time, resources, and get it going or not. I don't think that's our decision to make.
I agree with that. And I think that does what you were saying there. Sounds like we're aligned then.
I think we've come to a consensus. Good thing there's only 3 of us here tonight.
My
Not-
other question
not
was
5 of
around
each.
the mission style homesteading. So I guess we have to develop that. So that's a different number, so I'm good with that. All right, so who wants to tackle the motion with the recommendation?
You said no.
Good, no.
I thought I heard it yes, but could be mistaken. All right, I'll take a stab at it. I'll make a motion that we approve City Code Title 10-5C for the R7 zone amendments as written, with a further recommendation that we, what did I say?
Recommend approval. Recommend approval.
I thought I said recommend.
So,
I'll recommend approval regardless.
there we go.
With the additional recommendation that to the city council that we evaluate the need to establish either a form-based code or some form of city standard that allows us to apply an overlay zone for R7 that better influences the design of development for the zone.
They last part for their
It's up to you. Guys.
All right. Totally.
I just want to make sure it's good.
further influence design elements.
Yeah, for the R7 zone.
You want to use elements or standards?
Standards is better
Let's do standards instead of elements.
amended.
Amended.
So,
I'll second it, unless Jeremy wants to. Commissioner,
That's okay.
Commissioner Davis.
That's okay. That's all right. All right, so just for clarification on this, does it have to be roll call on this one? Okay. So, okay, roll call. Commissioner Lucy,
I'm an aye.
Commissioner Bold.
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. So that proceeds forward. Thank you. Great discussion. Thank you everyone for that. That's good. All right, final item, comments. Commissioner Walton, sorry,
No additional comments?
Commissioner Lucy?
Oh, you're gonna love me on this one. I actually have 2 things I'm curious about. The lights at the car wash, on the self-service bays. I don't know if this is a requirement that they already have in place, or if it's something that we maybe go to them, but is there a way to diminish them during the 11 PM to 5 AM hours? They are really bright. I just filtered myself right there because I was gonna say something else. So I don't know if there is a way. I know it looks like the automatic bays are light, like the light is less bright, but those 4 self-service bays, whew. And yes, I have been driving around South Weaver during those hours, so I'm aware.
I'll talk to.
I'm just curious
I'll
if
talk to them and see if there's a way.
just kind of dim them down even a little bit. I think it's something that the surrounding, residences might appreciate it. The other,
Before we move on to that, I mean,
Yeah.
when we approved it, it was based upon a lighting model that they gave us.
Yep.
So if it's exceeding those, like, isn't that one of those conditions?
We'll have our new code enforcement officer go on. and
go
check.
take a look at that. Sorry,
And see, I will.
I will look into it.
Another hat you're wearing now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Weird.
The other has to do with the RV park. And I know that there were supposed to be those cabins that were built. There's a lot of discussion about those, the movable structures. Are those in place or are those
They're
sites?
not there yet. They
being
have
used?
Submitted, building permit plans, but they're still going back and forth through review. The design that they're doing, the company that's doing these, they're kind of made out of foam. And they haven't been able to get through, the review process yet, but they're working on
Okay.
it.
Are those designated sites still, are they being used right now as RV parking spots?
That I'm not sure, but they are lowering it. They're only gonna be doing 5 cabins,
5 instead of,
20,
26.
yeah, they're doing to do 5. So
They always had the potential to do from.
less.
they didn't
Less
have-
than
they didn't
instead of
have to do
more?
them. It was, they could do up to this.
Up
right
to?
down through the center.
okay,
And then they're just gonna turn the other ones are just gonna be regular spots, still extend some,
And it's a con rock structure, just like the rock wall.
yeah. They're just having a few minor differences.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I guess
Doesn't
my-
know what to do with them yet.
It has nothing to, my only other thing is the enforcement on the lengths of stay. How is that, and is that being done?
About that, and he actually made the comment to the people that are managing it, that he wanted to see a spreadsheet, because we were getting to the point where if there was people there that they needed to leave. So he actually, the day before I talked to him, he had actually talked to his staff. He said he'd get back with me next week, but he'd make sure that they're in compliance. He wants to stay in compliance,
Okay,
keep the city happy.
perfect. That's all. I was just curious about it, and I've had some people ask me, and I didn't have an answer, so I was like, I'll bring it up at planning commission, so.
I didn't have any comments either, so I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
So move.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.